book Sacred, author Dennis Lehane, one of my favorites, writes, "There is something ugly about the flawless. Conversely, one could say, there is beauty in the flawed." And that has long been the appeal of Batman, a dark, highly complex character who could arguably also be considered an anti-hero, depending on which interpretation we look at out of the many that have been written over the years. By now, there has been a wealth of analysis on the highly anticipated 2022 version of The Batman, directed by Matt Reeves and starring Robert Pattinson in the iconic role. I watched it last week and wanted to share my own thoughts on why I think this is the best Batman thus far. In The Batman, we meet our hero at the very beginning of his journey. Bruce Wayne is about 2 years into becoming the masked vigilante of Gotham, and he has yet to come to terms with what that exactly means. When a grisly, high-profile murder takes place, Batman works together with Lieutenant James Gordon to find the mysterious serial killer, along with the reluctant help of others, including Catwoman. I was very surprised by this movie. I went in with almost no expectations and without reading any reviews. I've enjoyed Matt Reeves' work in the past, in particular Cloverfield and the Planet of the Apes movies, in which I think he displays a knack for grounded storytelling, despite the highly speculative premises of those films. It was the same for this Batman, and I was not disappointed. From the very beginning, with the faint strains of Ave Maria filling out the screen, Reeves, who also wrote the screenplay with Peter Craig, establishes the recurring thematic motifs of lenses, masks, mirrors, and reflections, using them to explore the ideas of vengeance, innocence, and the ramifications of power, both for those who don't have it and for those who wield it. The juxtaposition of perception and perspective are interwoven throughout the movie. Reeves employs a wide range of techniques, including interesting camera angles that play with the viewer's perception of narrative and whose lens with which we are watching this story unfold. This ambiguity enhances the tension of the mystery and adds greater nuance to the different layers of the story. This is very clearly a dark detective noir-inspired thriller, reminiscent of David Fincher's Seven. And the pairing of Batman with Gordon early in Batman's career serves a number of purposes. We see Batman struggling to grapple with who he is and what he wants to do, and the focus on this period of his life allows Reeves to do something no other Batman film has done, which is to showcase the protagonist without the overemphasis on his gadgets or smooth techniques for seamlessly escaping harm. Instead, the focus is on the characters themselves and their very human motivations and drives. Unlike the Tim Burton films, which really brought to life the surreal comic book element of the characters, and unlike Christopher Nolan's complex, larger-than-life interpretation of the genre, Reeves takes a completely different approach that emphasizes the humanity of the story in a way that brings it back to its roots. This pared-down approach applies to all the characters in the movie. Catwoman's costume is unlike any we've seen in past portrayals. She wears a very simple mask and outfit that serves as an excellent reminder of her real economic and social status within Gotham, and also her roots as cat burglar. The same can also be said for the Penguin or the Riddler, where the focus is firmly placed on their realistic, gritty primary motivations as people rather than as personalities. It's been a while since I last viewed it, so I actually rewatched the Dark Knight trilogy over the past week so that I was clear on how Reeves' take is different. We certainly can't disregard the impact that trilogy had at the time it came out and the contribution it made in moving the needle for the superhero genre. It took not just Batman, but the expectation of what that genre could be to a different level. Nolan's directorial approach is very technical and cerebral. His previous films, Memento, Inception, and recently Tenet, showcase his particular style. And the cast for the Dark Knight movies also reflect that technical strength, whether it was Christian Bale as Batman, Heath Ledger's incredible performance as the Joker, Anne Hathaway as Catwoman, Morgan Freeman, Michael Caine, or Tom Hardy as the fabulous villain Bane. But while we're watching the Dark Knight trilogy, what struck me was the writing itself, in particular the dialogue. While there is a hugeness and a complexity to the acting, directing, and the production, and a certain steely, almost cold technical perfection, the lines themselves lack subtlety and are very much on the nose. Often the dialogue between characters is simply used as a way to info-dump backstory or to obviously tell the audience what a character may be feeling or thinking. This Batman turns that around. The writing excels. Every scene serves a purpose in advancing this brooding psychological crime thriller. Clues and red herrings lay out the path of the plot while still remaining tightly integrated to Batman's internal character arc as well as the larger themes. The climax serves as a pivot point for both the ultimate resolution of the plot as well as Batman's growth throughout the film. The movie's villain also is a prime example of this. Like all well-written stories in which the antagonist raises important questions about the protagonist and their goals, the Riddler serves as an excellent mirror to the character of Batman himself, in which we see that perhaps they have more in common than they do differences. There's more showing rather than telling. Emotions and intentions are conveyed visually through the acting or the camera, rather than told to us through clunky dialogue. The emphasis is not on the perfect cold masks of personas, but rather on their very human flaws. This deep humanization results in a new, smart, mature, literary-driven approach that I don't think we've really seen in previous Batman movies. I admit that when I first heard Pattinson would be playing the role, I felt ambivalent. Not because of his role in Twilight, and certainly not because of his abilities as an actor, which he has proven time and time again as being a very fine one in many movies over the years, including The Lighthouse, which I enjoyed. My hesitance was because I wasn't sure if he could pull off the physical gravitas necessary for the character. But I was wrong. Reeves and Pattinson did an excellent job of conveying this through the clever use of contrasts. One of the questions I frequently ask my writing or music students is, which is more effective? If you are drawing a bright red circle, would it stand out more on a black canvas or a white one? The answer, of course, is white. Using contrast is a highly effective technique to amplify what you want to highlight. Reeves employs this technique through rhythm and tempo. A palpable constant tension pervades the entire movie. By using slower, heavily paced scenes, often without many words being spoken, Reeves makes the contrasting action scenes that much more impactful. The sudden shifts in rhythm and speed create a sense of unpredictability and a visceral muscularity in the action scenes, which ends up communicating a greater sense of unleashed, brutal violence in a way that's very different from previous versions. This is also seen through the fact that Batman himself has very few lines in this movie. The strength and weight of his presence are fleshed out in other ways. Everything from the sounds of his heavy, deliberate footsteps as he approaches, the way he emerges from the darkness, through what Pattinson expresses simply with his eyes, through the ways other characters react to him, and through visual layers and editing that emphasize these sudden bursts of acceleration. As for the rest of the cast, if there's one word I would use to describe it, it would be quality. Zoe Kravitz was mesmerizing. She has the innate ability to capture the audience's attention with a simple glance. The subtlety and nuance of everyone's performance added an entirely different dimension to each of these iconic characters. Paul Dano as the Riddler is not only intensely creepy and disturbing, but his portrayal feels very relevant and real to our current times. Colin Farrell is completely unrecognizable as the Penguin, and John Turturro as the mobster Falcone, Andy Serkis as Alfred, and Jeffrey Wright as Lieutenant Gordon also bring fresh, nuanced interpretations to these roles. But Pattinson really surprised me here, bringing something new we haven't quite seen in previous Batmans, especially with the role of Bruce Wayne. His depiction of Bruce's pain, trauma, vulnerability, but especially his alienation, shifts the narrative of this billionaire's life from one living in the perfect castle of Wayne Manor to one that parallels the powerless people of Gotham who also feel forgotten and lost. And in that sense, Bruce Wayne, and therefore Batman's journey, becomes a metaphor for the city of Gotham itself. In every well-written detective series or noir, the setting itself, the city, plays a crucial role in how the story is shaped. It takes on a character of its own, and Gotham very much exemplifies this here. Visually, this is a very dark-toned movie, but Reeves employs highly effective flashes of color to enhance the luridness of the city to great effect. Much like Scorsese's famous title opening to Taxi Driver, in which the splashes of color through the rain-soaked windshield depict the corruption and hypocrisy of New York as seen through the eyes of Travis Bickle, played by Robert De Niro, this selective use of rich color against the dark palette of the Batman silently communicates an additional layer to the story, while at the same time keeping the visual narrative grounded in the recurring themes of perception and perspective. The soundtrack, written by Michael Giacchino, also plays a critical role in bringing to life the emotional direction of each scene. Unlike the elaborate orchestral scores of previous Batmans, the sound here is almost minimalist, pulled back, restrained almost, and atmospheric in a way that heightened the ominous tension. I also found it very interesting that there was almost a mechanical nature to the music, evoking this feeling of grinding gears. This narrow range of harmonic colors intensifies the underlying rage and frustration of the characters and the people of Gotham as they serve as cogs within the machine of corruption, and their desire to find justice and break free, even if the means for that is through violence. This is not a loud, bombastic, conventional superhero movie. It is a well-written thriller featuring a haunted, deeply flawed protagonist wrestling with his own darkness alongside a cast of well-rounded characters, each with their own complex and nuanced motivations and experiences. This is essentially what Batman is, a human being, first and foremost, whose struggle to understand the meaning of justice is clouded by the shadows of the past. But it's the first time I've really seen that aspect thoroughly explored in such a layered manner, with the script, the visual language, and through the performances themselves. There are those who may not like that, who may prefer the big bangs and the gadgets and a celebration of the very superhumanness or the superhero element of these types of stories. But for me, I think the more we ask an audience to suspend disbelief, particularly in works of speculative fiction, the greater need there is to find a realistic grounding in a character's emotional arcs and in the deeper elements of human nature which drive choice and action. These are the foundational building blocks of an excellent story in any medium, because it is within those flaws that we uncover the beauty of larger universal themes such as redemption, meaning, and justice.